Stand here, right here, on these cracked stones in the middle of Rome. Look around you. Weeds push through broken marble. Tourists snap photos of columns that are missing their tops. Stray cats sleep in the shadows of walls that used to hold up the world. You are standing where 1 million people once lived under the most powerful government the earth has ever seen. The Roman Senate met a few hundred meters from where you're standing. Gladiators bled and died just over there. Aqueducts built by this civilization carried fresh water across half a continent. And then it all stopped. The last emperor of Western Rome was a teenager nobody remembers. Rome's population crashed by 90% in 200 years. The Colosseum, that giant monument to Roman power, was eventually stripped for building stone like a quarry. A city of 1 million shrank to a muddy town of 20,000. This wasn't just a city that fell, it was an entire world that ended. Using advanced AI to bring ancient illustrations, maps, and forgotten artwork to life, we're not just going to tell you this story. You're going to watch it happen. It's 117 AD. The Roman Empire has never been larger. It stretches from Scotland to Iraq, from the Sahara to the Black Sea. 1 in every 4 human beings alive on Earth answers to Rome. The roads connect everything. The legions enforce everything. The law governs everything. Empires don't collapse from the outside in. They collapse from the inside out. This is the story of how the greatest state in human history died and took the ancient world with it. To understand how Rome fell, you first need to understand what Rome actually was. Because Rome wasn't just a city, it was a machine. And like any machine, it only worked when all the parts were moving together. The first part was the legions. Rome's professional army, roughly 300,000 soldiers at its peak, didn't just fight wars. They built roads, enforced tax collection, and held 50 million people in line across 3 continents. Remove them, and the whole structure shakes. The second part was the tax system. Money flowed in from every corner of the empire, from grain farmers in Egypt, silver miners in Spain, merchants in Syria. That money paid the soldiers, fed the cities, and kept the government running. Stop the money, and the soldiers stopped fighting. The third part was the grain supply. The city of Rome alone needed to feed 1 million people every single day. Most of that food came from North Africa, loaded onto ships, sailed across the Mediterranean, and distributed through a network of warehouses and officials. One bad harvest, one disrupted shipping lane, and the capital starves. And holding all of it together was Roman law, a shared legal code that made it possible for a merchant in Britain and a farmer in Turkey to operate under the same rules. It was the invisible glue. Here's the problem. When a system has that many moving parts, every single part becomes a weak point, and the first crack appeared earlier than most people realize. In 69 AD, just a few decades after the empire hit its stride, 4 different men declared themselves emperor in a single year. 4, each backed by a different army. Rome survived that crisis, but something had been revealed. The throne wasn't just inherited anymore, it could be taken. And every ambitious general in the empire had just been handed the same dangerous idea. If the year of the 4 emperors was a warning, Rome didn't heed it. Because roughly 150 years later, the warning became a catastrophe. The period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century runs from 235 AD to 284 AD. 50 years, 26 emperors, and almost every single one of them was assassinated. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful office in the world had become the most dangerous job in the world. First, the legions stop protecting the empire and start making their own emperors. Generals march on Rome not to defend it, but to claim it. Every time a new strongman takes the throne, a rival army somewhere else decides their general deserves it more. The civil wars never fully stop. Then the borders start breaking. With the armies distracted by internal fighting, the empire's enemies move in. Germanic tribes pour across the Rhine and Danube. Persian forces push hard from the east. At one point, the empire fractures into 3 separate pieces at the same time. Then the plague arrives. The Cyprian plague rips through the empire for nearly 20 years, killing an estimated 5,000 people per day at its peak in Rome alone. Fields go unfarmed. Tax collectors find empty villages. The treasury runs dry, and when governments run out of money, they make desperate decisions. Rome starts shaving silver out of its coins to mint more of them. A Roman silver coin that was once 90% pure silver drops to just 2% silver within a generation. Prices explode. Soldiers demand more pay. The spiral tightens. Rome crawls out of the 3rd century still breathing. The borders hold. Barely. The institution survives. Barely. But the Rome that emerges is harder, more paranoid, and held together by force rather than faith. The confidence is gone. And confidence, it turns out, was load-bearing. By the time Diocletian takes power in 284 AD, the empire is bleeding from every direction. And unlike many of the men who came before him, Diocletian actually understands why. The empire is too big for one man to run. That's the diagnosis. So he does something radical. He splits it. Diocletian creates a system called the Tetrarchy, rule by 4. 2 senior emperors, 2 junior emperors, each responsible for a different region. The idea is simple and smart. Divide the workload. Put a commander close to every major frontier. Stop the empire from being paralyzed every time one man dies or gets murdered. It works, for a while. Then Constantine arrives. He reunifies the empire under his sole rule, wins a series of brutal civil wars, and makes 2 decisions that reshape everything. First, he adopts Christianity as the empire's favored religion, hoping a shared faith will hold 50 million people together better than fear alone. Second, he builds a brand new capital city on the eastern edge of Europe, Constantinople, on the edge of what is now Turkey. Both decisions make sense on paper. In practice, they quietly tilt the empire's center of gravity eastward. Constantinople is newer, richer, and easier to defend than Rome. The best architects go there, the best administrators go there, the wealthiest merchants settle there. Imperial attention, imperial money, and imperial energy all flow east. The western half of the empire, older, more exposed, harder to manage, starts to hollow out from the inside. The tax base shrinks. The frontier armies get thinner. The infrastructure starts to age without enough money to maintain it. Rome is still the symbol. Every emperor still wants the title. But it is no longer the engine. The east is being saved, and the west is being quietly abandoned. Here is the part of the story that most people get wrong. When we talk about the barbarians who brought Rome down, we picture savage warriors storming the gates from outside. Bloodthirsty outsiders who hated everything Rome stood for. That image makes for a good movie. But it isn't what actually happened. The people pressing against Rome's borders in the late 300s AD aren't attacking because they want to destroy Rome. Most of them want to get inside Rome. Because something far more terrifying than any Roman legion is coming from the east, and they are running from it. The Huns are a nomadic warrior people from the Central Asian steppe, and they arrive in Europe like a shockwave. Nobody in the Western world has encountered anything like them. They fight from horseback with a speed and ferocity that Gothic and Germanic peoples have no answer to. So those peoples do the only logical thing. They run west. The Visigoths, a Gothic people who have lived near Rome's borders for generations, send a formal request to cross the Danube River into Roman territory. They aren't invading. They are asking for asylum. Hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children fleeing for their lives. Rome says yes, and then immediately makes everything worse. Roman officials exploit the refugees brutally, extorting food, enslaving children, treating an entire displaced people like a resource to be squeezed. The Visigoths, still armed, reach a breaking point. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, They annihilate a Roman army. The Eastern Emperor Valens is killed on the battlefield, one of the very few Roman emperors to die fighting an enemy in the field. Rome had let these people in, had pushed them to rebellion, and had paid for it in blood. The border isn't a wall anymore, it's a fiction. Let's pause on this moment, because it needs to land properly. In 410 AD, a Gothic army led by a man named Alaric walks through the gates of Rome. That sentence doesn't sound shocking until you understand what it means. The city of Rome had not been entered by an enemy force in 800 years, 8 centuries. For longer than the entire lifespan of the United States multiplied by 4, Rome had been untouchable. Alaric doesn't arrive without warning. He has besieged the city twice before, both times accepting payment to leave. But the Western government, now operating out of a small, swampy city called Ravenna, keeps breaking its promises. So on the third attempt, Alaric's army doesn't stop at the walls. What happens inside is important to get right. The Visigoths loot the city. They strip palaces, empty treasuries, and carry off everything of value they can move. But they don't burn Rome to the ground. They don't massacre the population wholesale. After 3 days, they leave. By the standards of ancient warfare, it is almost restrained. But the ancient world doesn't experience it that way. Saint Jerome, one of the most respected Christian scholars of the age, is living in the Middle East when the news reaches him. He writes that he is so shocked he cannot speak. The city that had conquered the world, he says, has itself been conquered. Across the empire, people who had built their entire understanding of reality around Roman permanence simply don't know what to do with this information. Rome had always been the fixed point, the thing that didn't fall, the proof that civilization was stronger than chaos. That proof is gone now. The physical city survives 410 AD. The buildings still stand. The population rebuilds. But something invisible and load-bearing has collapsed completely. Rome, the city, survives 410. Rome, the idea, does not. After 410, the Western Empire doesn't dramatically collapse. It does something slower and in many ways sadder. It fades. The men sitting on the throne in the decades that follow are emperors in name only. The real power belongs to military strongmen, generals and warlords, many of them of Germanic origin, who command the only armies that still function. The emperors sign the documents. They wear the purple robes. They mint the coins with their faces on them. But everyone in the room knows who is actually in charge. The names of these final emperors tell the story on their own. Libius Severus, installed and controlled by a Germanic general, dies after 4 years, possibly poisoned. Glycerius lasts less than a year before being deposed and forced to become a bishop. Julius Nepos is chased out of Italy by his own commander. These are not men steering a great civilization. These are figures being moved around a board by people with more power and less patience. Meanwhile, the territory itself is slipping away. By 450 AD, large parts of Gaul, modern France, are governed by Visigoth and Frankish kings who pay no taxes to Rome and answer to no Roman official. Spain is carved up between competing Germanic groups. North Africa, the source of the grain that once fed the capital, has been seized by the Vandals. The tax revenue from those regions is simply gone. With no money, the legions can't be paid reliably, and mercenaries who aren't paid don't fight. They negotiate, or they switch sides. The bureaucracy shrinks. The roads stop being repaired. The frontier posts go quiet. 476 AD, the date every textbook marks as the fall, is almost beside the point. When Odoacer deposes the last Western emperor that year, he isn't destroying something. He is tidying up the remains of something that has already stopped working. The empire doesn't fall in 476. It dissolves. Now we arrive at the date, the one in every textbook, 476 AD, the so-called Fall of Rome. And the first thing you need to know is that nobody living through it thought anything particularly significant had happened. The last emperor of the Western Roman Empire is a teenager named Romulus Augustulus. Take a moment with that name. Romulus, the name of the legendary founder of Rome itself. Augustus, the title of the greatest emperor who ever lived. Somehow, history lands both names on a frightened boy who rules for less than a year and is remembered by almost nobody in his own lifetime. Odoacer, a Germanic military commander who has been effectively running the Western government anyway, deposes him in September of 476. There is no great battle, no dramatic last stand on the steps of the Senate. Romulus is removed, given a pension, and sent to live in a castle in southern Italy. He probably lives comfortably for years afterward. And then Odoacer does something that reveals exactly how hollow the moment really is. Instead of declaring himself the new Roman emperor, he sends the imperial crown and robes east to Constantinople. He governs Italy as a king under the nominal authority of the Eastern emperor. He isn't destroying Rome's legacy. He is politely returning it, because the Eastern Empire isn't falling at all. It continues for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, Roman administration, and Roman identity until 1453 AD. The people in Constantinople in 476 don't mark it as a turning point. Why would they? The scribes keeping records in 476 AD don't write, "Today the Roman Empire ended." They write about harvests and appointments and military movements. The fall of Rome isn't a bang. It's the moment you realize the music stopped, and you can't remember exactly when. When a great tree falls in a forest, it doesn't disappear. It becomes something else. Moss grows on it, animals shelter inside it. Smaller plants push up through its rotting wood, fed by everything it once was. Ecologists call it a nurse log. The fallen thing becomes the foundation for the next generation of life. Rome is history's greatest nurse log. The Catholic Church moves into the vacuum the Western Empire leaves behind, preserving Latin as the language of education and law across Europe for the next 1,000 years. The Pope begins performing many of the administrative functions the Emperor once handled. The church buildings go up on the same sites as Roman temples. The organization survives because it borrows Rome's skeleton. The Germanic kingdoms that replace Rome don't throw out Roman systems. They put on Roman clothes. They keep Roman legal codes, Roman tax structures, and Roman road networks because those tools work and they know it. The Franks, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, they all govern using frameworks Rome built. Further east, Islamic scholars translate and preserve Greek and Roman knowledge in science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Much of what Europe eventually rediscovers during the Renaissance comes back through Arabic libraries that kept it alive when European ones went dark. And the fingerprints Rome left on the modern world are everywhere once you start looking. The calendar you check on your phone is Roman. The legal principle that you are innocent until proven guilty is Roman. The idea that a government should answer to a body of elected representatives is Roman. Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people, are all direct descendants of Latin. Rome didn't just collapse, it composted. Everything that grew from it, medieval Europe, the Renaissance, Western law, the very idea of citizenship, grew from Roman soil. The lesson isn't complicated. No system is permanent. Complexity without adaptability is just fragility wearing an expensive mask. And the things empires build, the ideas, the structures, the languages, almost always outlast the empires themselves. What Rome left behind didn't just survive the fall. In many ways, it still hasn't finished growing. From 1 million people to a ghost town in 2 centuries. That's what collapse actually looks like. Not a single dramatic moment, not one villain, not one bad decision. Just 1,000 small failures that nobody stopped in time. A currency quietly debased, a border gradually ignored, a tax base slowly shrinking. An emperor nobody respects being replaced by another emperor nobody respects. Rome didn't fall because it ran out of soldiers. It fell because it ran out of the things that make soldiers worth having: shared purpose, functional institutions, and a system that could adapt when the world changed around it. That's a story worth understanding. Because it isn't only Rome's story. If this video gave you something, a new way of seeing history, a detail you'd never heard before, a moment where it all clicked, please take 2 seconds and hit the like button. And if you want more of it, subscribing is how you make sure you don't miss what's coming next. Now here's the question I genuinely want you to answer in the comments below. Which empire do you want to see fall next? The Mongols? The Ottomans? The British Empire? The Han Dynasty? Every one of them has a collapse story as dramatic, as complicated, and as relevant as Rome's. Your comment might be the one that decides the next video. Thank you for traveling this far back into the ancient world. And as always, we'll see you in the past.